over to you, Dr. Abdulsalari sir.
We can save time. Thank you very much. First of all, my gratitude to all the distinguished speakers and panelists and all the participants who have joined us today. It is very encouraging to see not only the line of speakers, but also the participants. On your screen, you can see that it's 13 panelists and 98 attendees, and it's still people, they're still joining. And that shows the importance of this subject, and it also, of course, shows the value that people give to the speakers, their profile, who would be sharing their thoughts on this very important subject. Now, I remember it would bring the focus on the social sector development, especially health and disaster preparedness would be brought to the policy radar. But just like I did this morning when my alarm turned off, I snoozed it and I thought I should sleep for another 15 minutes. I kept on doing it for at least good half an hour. Looks like that we didn't learn anything from pandemic and from floods and from all other things that are happening around us, and we keep on putting the snooze button on. While this thing, perhaps in our personal lives, we may afford to do it, but in the life of nations, this cannot be done indefinitely. And this is what we are discussing today with the UNICEF. Thanks to UNICEF's support for initiating research on it and policy dialogue on it. Now we are talking of two things: fiscal space and alternatives. On fiscal space, I know the scope is quite limited. After paying the provincial share, federal government is just left with 11 trillion rupees, and that 11 trillion rupees out of 11 trillion, 8.2 trillion exactly the same, not exactly the same, rather slightly more than what the provincial share is, goes for this debt service and debt repayment. So 8.2 trillion is the share of provinces from the fiscal divisible pool, and 8.2 trillion is the amount of debt that federal government has to take care of. So fiscal space with federal government, one knows, is quite limited. Even after paying the share of provinces for rest of the expenditures, for defense and law enforcement, for running of the public sector government, pays and pension and PSTP, everything, we need to borrow more to do it. And then in provinces too, one finds that in the absence of this PFC award, Provincial Finance Commission award, much of the amount that goes to provinces, if you look at the expenditure, they are spent on provincial capital or one or two other big cities in the province, and that too on infrastructure. And that's where one feels that the social sector expenditure, they are getting ignored. So this is another piece of jigsaw puzzle. And the third piece of jigsaw puzzle is alternatives. Fortunately, we do have alternatives today. We can think of now more than one ways of mobilizing resources for social sector development, and majority of those alternatives, they are out of public sector finances, and they are out of bilateral and multilateral development from governments. We know that we are living in a new world disorder. We know that the fiscal space globally for social sector development is shrinking. We know that the major bilateral agencies, they are running out of finances. And that's what we wanted to discuss today with this with these eminent panelists. What are the options for example, dual swap arrangement? What are the options for ESG and CSR? What are the options for green financing and climate financing? What are the options for various other venues and avenues from where finance can be mobilized, especially private sector and the philanthropies and foundations? So this is what we will be listening from our eminent panelists, and I'm looking forward to the policy note that would be prepared at the end of this very rich discussion. I'm very hopeful that this policy note would not only be a useful piece of academic research, but it would also be very useful for policymakers. And I once again thanks all for joining and for sparing their time to share their thoughts with us. Over to you, Sai.
Thank you, Dr. Abid Suleri, for welcome remarks, and very rightly on the role of private sector. We will be listening more on. Let me now invite Mr. Joshua Kakayar, OIC Deputy Representative, UNICEF Pakistan, for his opening remarks. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Please confirm if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, colleagues, partners, on behalf of UNICEF, it's my pleasure to warmly welcome you all to today's national dialogue, jointly convened with our valued partners, the Sustainable Development Policy Institute, SDPI. Today's dialogue is more than a fiscal conversation. It's about rethinking the architecture of opportunity, how we finance a future where no child is left behind. UNICEF is proud to support this national conversation, which sits at the nexus of economic resilience, human capital development, and social equity. While fiscal constraints are a reality, how we choose to respond will shape Pakistan's human development trajectory for years to come. With over 40% of the population of Pakistan under the age of 18 years, investing in children is not just a moral imperative, it is an economic necessity. Yet we see that budget allocations for child-related sectors such as education, nutrition, social protection, even healthcare and water and sanitation and hygiene, investments in these sectors remain persistently low, often below what one might expect of a country with a large population of children as Pakistan. Public spending on education, for an example, ranges only between 2 and 2.1% of the GDP. Investment and allocations to the health sector is estimated to about 1%. Social protection is even lower at less than 1%, and they remain well below international benchmarks, and inflation keeps nibbing away these allocations, further eroding real budgets and service delivery potential. For an example, education allocation and spending, which is estimated between 2.0 and 2.1% of the GDP, significantly under the 4% UN benchmark and 6% ACON declaration commitment. While national level child-specific data is limited, UNICEF supported public expenditure reviews across provinces consistently shows that child-focused investments fall short of global norms. Without sustained and equitable investment, the price will be paid in stunted futures, intergenerational poverty, and untapped national potential. At UNICEF, we've supported public expenditure reviews and budget briefs at both federal and provincial levels, identifying actionable ways to improve the adequacy, efficiency, and equity of spending. For instance, in a province like Punjab, child-focused spending has declined to just 1.3% of GDP, while nutrition and WASH remain chronically underfunded. These trends are concerning and unsustainable. If Pakistan is to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals or the UN Framework's equity ambitions, Pakistan's social sector financing gap needs to meet the SDGs by 2030 was estimated to be at about 16.1% annually by the IMF. But actual needs are likely even higher today than they were then, underscoring the urgency for updated 2024 aligned costing and investment planning. Still, we know that even modest reallocations, when strategically targeted, can yield outsized returns for child well-being. Our fiscal diagnostics have informed the key ministries and parliaments, supporting more evidence-informed budget planning and execution. At the same time, three major shifts are exerting unprecedented pressure on Pakistan's fiscal space. The first is the demographic wave. Over 60 million Pakistan children will enter adulthood by the year 2035. Within the next 10 years, we will see 60 million children graduate into adulthood. But with this current stunting rate of 38%, we risk preparing a generation for poverty rather than for productivity. The second concern is climate shock. All of us are aware about the devastating effects of the 2022 floods that caused an estimated $15.2 billion loss in economic value, underscoring the very urgent need for resilient infrastructure and climate-smart investments. And the third thing, last but not least, is the debt trap. Every Pakistani rupee spent on servicing debt is a rupee that is not spent on either girls' education in Balochistan or child nutrition in Sindh. So every money that we spend on servicing debt is the money that is missed for investing in the relevant sectors that affect and influence child well-being. Just this month, at the 4th International Conference of Financing for Development in Seville, Pakistan took a bold and principled stand. The finance minister, Honorable Mahmood, led calls from the Global South for just and inclusive financing solutions, advocating for debt for climate swaps and scaled-up support to climate-vulnerable economies. He also highlighted Pakistan's leadership in youth-focused investment tools, citing ongoing innovations in shock-responsive safety nets and the upcoming climate risk insurance pilot linked to school nutrition. This shows real political momentum, and it's something we must now translate into delivery. In Pakistan, UNICEF remains a steadfast partner to the Ministry of Planning and the Ministry of Finance, as well as BISP and other key institutions. We are committed to co-developing actionable financing models that include strengthening the use of data and evidence to inform inclusive and equitable budget decisions, ensuring resources are aligned with the needs of all children. Secondly, supporting institutional efforts to enhance child-responsive budgeting and expenditure tracking, including through SDG-aligned tagging frameworks. And thirdly, advocating and supporting continued progress towards performance-based budgeting to better link public spending with measurable outcomes, and finally, collaboratively exploring opportunities to improve the efficiency and impact of public finance for children, including the potential of innovative and alternative finance mechanisms to support sustainable social sector investment. The choice before us is clear. We either choose to maintain business as usual and risk a lost generation, or choose to act decisively to unlock Pakistan's demographic dividend and climate resilience for a sustainable and bright future for the coming generations. Like the previous speaker said, I also hope that today's dialogue will lead to tangible recommendations and commitments that take us from diagnosis to delivery. UNICEF stands ready to work with the government of Pakistan and all partners in transforming fiscal constraints into sustainable opportunities for every child and in every community. Shukriya, thank you, and I wish you a very fruitful deliberation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Joshua, country representative, UNICEF, for welcome and opening remarks. And I think there's no choice, actually. The only choice is to invest in the children of this nation. The other is catastrophe, not a choice. And I think your important point on the impact of lower child investment, particularly on intergeneration poverty, is really, really very significant. We did a study, and 68% chances that if a son is born to a poor father, will remain poor in his life entirely. 68% chances. And that really speaks the situation for the future generations and really call for a child-focused investments, rightly emphasized. So let me now bring in Mr. Faisal Rashid for a stage setting presentation, particularly on the fiscal landscape. He is principal consultant, public finance, Oxford Policy Management, is with the vast experience. Over to you, Faisal Rashid, sir.
Thank you, Sajid sir. I'll share my slide. So can you allow me to do that?
It's already allowed. Please, you can share your.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please do let me know when you can see my slides.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. So as Sajid Saab introduced, my job today is to set the background for the later discussion. So I'll give you a very quick snapshot of the macro fiscal landscape of the country and the constraint of fiscal resources we have to invest in children. I think I'll start with the background that about 2 years ago, we were in a very, very critical macroeconomic condition. We were facing a default, and it was the IMF program, the provisional or interim program, that actually helped Pakistan get out of that default situation. After that, Pakistan entered into a 37-month extended finance facility, and the progress on that has been going well. Pakistan has been able to complete the first review of the IMF in May, as a result of which $1 billion worth of financing was provided to the government, and the fund has acknowledged that stability is coming back to Pakistan. Here are some of the key macroeconomic indicators. We see that in the from sort of top left, we see that inflation has come down from 29.2% to 5.1%. Fiscal deficit, there has been an improvement of 2.1 percentage points in the fiscal deficit of Pakistan. In 2022-23, it was 7.7%, and now it has come down to 5.6%. We have actually had a current account surplus last year, and this graph shows you that there has been massive improvement in the current account balance of the country as well, mainly on the back of increase in remittances and some increase in exports. Foreign exchange reserves have also witnessed a decent growth from $4.5 billion 2 years ago. They have come up to about $14 billion, and the overall reserves of the country are around $20 billion. We have recently seen the budget when it was presented in the National Assembly, and we see that the next budget for 25-26 is an effort to continue the economic recovery and fiscal consolidation in Pakistan. And these are the key macroeconomic assumptions. Here we see that the growth is expected to go up to about 4.1%. Inflation is expected to remain stable. Very importantly, Pakistan will continue its efforts to increase the own source revenue, but it will still be around 10.9% of GDP. I'm talking about the FBR revenues. Overall, the tax to GDP ratio in country has now reached about 12%, and then in the next couple of years, the government targets to take it to around 13%. Still, we'll have next year we'll have a deficit of about 3.9% and a primary balance of 2.4% of GDP. So this is kind of the indicators or assumptions under which the budget for this year has been prepared. If we look at the larger numbers, we see that next year FBR will be collecting 14.1 trillion rupees, which will be around 10.9% of GDP. If we add the non-tax resources to this tax revenue of the federal government, so the total revenue will be 19.3 trillion rupees. As Abid Saab explained, that out of this, 8.2 trillion will be given to provinces by the federal government, so it will only be left with 11 trillion rupees. And the expenditure of the federal government alone is about 17.6 trillion. So the federal government has a deficit of about 6.5 trillion rupees in its budget. And if we add the provincial surplus that the federal government is expecting this year, the deficit will come down to about 5 trillion rupees. So in that regard, the overall fiscal deficit will be around 3.9%. If we actually look at these numbers from a higher level, we see that next year, the current expenditure of the federal government will be 16.3 trillion, and the PSDP has been squeezed to only 1 trillion rupees at the federal level, which is really small. It's about 0.8% of GDP. So basically, the development resources are lacking at the federal level. We can move forward and see, what is the composition of the current expenditure. So out of the 16.3 trillion rupees worth of total current expenditure of the federal government, 8.2 will be spent on the payment of interest on debt. After this, the defense and other expenditures will sort of take a lot of fiscal space. So basically, at the federal level, there is very little fiscal space for social services for children. This is again a graphical representation of the same current expenditure. We see that 66% of the total recurrent expenditure will be spent on interest payments and defense services, and very little is left for all the other expenses of the federal government. So if we actually move a step below to the provincial revenues and expenditure, we see that provincial governments will have a revenue of about 10.7 trillion, and their expenditures are around 10 trillion rupees. And that's where the bulk of the development expenditure will take place in Pakistan this year, which will be around 3.2 trillion rupees. So in that regard, if we actually go down to the next slide, we see that the total development expenditure in Pakistan is going to be about 4.1 trillion rupees, and this is about 3.2% of GDP. And if you see that as a percent of total sort of resource envelope, it will be around 15%. And this number is actually quite small, considering the needs that we have at the federal and provincial level. So we have very little fiscal space for social services and child care. Key constraints in the social sector spending, I think we all know the problems that we face. We have more than 25 million out of school children. Our HDI, Human Development Index, is one of the lowest in the region even. The infant and child mortality rates remain high. The stunting and wasting level, I think they are still very high, even in Punjab and other provinces. And qualitative, I think for a fiscal expert or for an economist, the worrying part is that the quality of our social spending has declined. And we can see that in the stagnation of health and education sector outcomes of the provinces. So, if you even if you look at enrollment and other numbers, we see that there is very, very little improvement. I'll in the next slide, I'll just very briefly talk about the health expenditure, the health sector. So this is the national picture for health. We see that in the graph or this chart, we see that in all provinces, there is a declining trend of expenditure on health. And this is quite worrying. And we see that in dollar terms, we are spending about $21 per capita overall in Pakistan. Some provinces are spending a bit high, some a bit low. And what's more problematic is that 47% of the total health expenditure incurred by an average Pakistani is basically the out-of-pocket expense, which means that the public sector is not providing that. That individual is sort of making up for that expenditure from his own pocket. And this can be catastrophic for anybody, any poor, if they find a major illness in their family. So clearly, we have need for alternative financing. We spend only about 2% of GDP on education and 1% on health. Alternative financing, there are so many options. I'm sure the speakers after me will talk about it. But I also believe that the development partners of the government need to really work with it to provide technical assistance to help enhance the quality of social sector expenditure, so that whatever little we have, we actually are able to sort of make the outcomes change using those resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Faisal Saab. Really giving us a worrying picture on social investments in Pakistan, and that really is the call to align expenditures in expenditure quality with the children-focused and youth-centric public finance, particularly the expenditure design. Thank you. Let me now bring in Mr. Zafar Masood Saab as Chief Executive Officer, the Bank of Punjab, and really known for his innovative thoughts on particularly financing. Bank of Punjab is really one of the leading bank on this one. So he will be speaking on innovating financing models that Pakistan can institutionalize to finance social investments. And I'll be then later coming to Dr. Saima Bashir Saiba for her special remarks. Over to you, Zafar Saab.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sajid. This is at the outset, let me just warn you that, I've been allocated 10 minutes, but, I'm so passionate about this whole subject that I might push my luck and stretch a little more, Dr. Saab, with your permission. Also, I'll be very keen if, I don't know, I don't want to spoil your format, but if it's possible, I'll be happy to take 2-3 questions, as you know that I have to leave early, because this is such a novel idea and an evolving thought that if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to respond. If it's not possible right away, it's okay. You can send me the questions later on, Dr. Saab, and I will make sure that I'll respond to them, because I don't think we'll be able to do justice with what kind of options are available out there in the non-conventional space to finance social sector investments.
We will continue following you. Please.
To begin with, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Saab. To begin with, next slide. To begin with, the social, ugly slide pe social funding is tightening globally.
Zafar Saab, आपकी तरफ से ही मूव हो रही होंगी, क्योंकि आपने शेयर किया है, तो उसकी तरफ से मूव हो रही होंगी. Yes, thank you.
मैं अपनी टीम को कह रहा हूँ, हमजा को कह रहा हूँ, हमजा इसको मूव करे स्लाइड को जी. Social sector funding is getting tighter globally. The conventional fiscal resources are squeezing. पिछली वाली slide पे रहो. And the reliance on debt is increasing as we've witnessed in the last few decades. पिछली slide पे रहो, Hamza. Yeah, I don't know who is running this. Hamza, Raza. The first victim generally in this kind of situation and environment is obviously the social sector investment. And exactly the same situation we are witnessing in Pakistan too. But more pronounced, this is a more pronounced problem while this is happening across the globe, but it is a more pronounced problem in Pakistan. In Pakistan, in the third world country. Doctor साहब एक मिनट होल्ड कीजिएगा.
जी प्लीज.
ये वाली स्लाइड हाँ ठीक है. ओके सो सॉरी डॉक्टर साहब मैं क्योंकि ट्रैवल कर रहा हूँ तो some logistical issues to be sorted out. So what is happening is that the current financing frameworks are surely insufficient. What needs to be changed? Frankly speaking, let me say this at the outset. The change is necessary in the mindset, in the way we think about the social sector spending. This is not an expense. This is an investment, and I'm glad that you've used the words investment in your introduction. And how can we change it? What are the tools available? I will cover my presentation today primarily on those tools, and then obviously the lessons that we could learn from how this has been done globally. Interestingly enough, globally, this whole concept is also evolving. This is a pretty recent concept and idea, and not much has been done about this. So, in this evolving situation, you always have an opportunity to make it more tailor-made towards your own requirement, and that's what we will talk about in the at the end. Next slide, Hamza. The social sector situation, Dr. Faisal has already covered it well. The speakers before me have covered it adequately. And now I will not talk about anything in detail here. All I would like to say is that, in all the indicators, unfortunately, Pakistan is struggling. And the problem is not merely the funding per se. It is beyond funding. It is actually addressing the effectiveness of whatever funding that has been put in as well. So we are facing a double sort of jeopardy. Next, Hamza. The structural financing gap in Pakistan typically, are confronted with serious social financing, confronted with when it comes to social financing. Hamza, next slide, please. The commercial, the government budget is low and is inconsistent, as Dr. Faisal earlier talked about. And the funding requirement is so enormous on the other hand that whatever funding you could channelize and invest, you will always be lagging behind in terms of meeting our social sector investment requirements. The social sector investment requirement, I call them suppressed demand requirements, where whatever you can put in case of Pakistan, it will never be adequate. So we need to thinking on how we can actually go for a larger pool by engaging various stakeholders locally and internationally. The social sector capacity, what has happened is that after 18th Amendment, the social sector per se is become the domain of the provinces, and perhaps rightly so. And I'll talk about it a little later when I talk about China. that the provinces have been given the responsibility to run with the ball on social investments, but unfortunately, they seriously lack the capacity. And hence, the problem of capacity also being faced at the provincial level. On the private sector side, the conventional CSR front, I think Pakistan has learned the mastery of it, but it need to be more structured. It need to be more channelized towards. The idea is how we can leverage that CSR funding. But frankly, Dr. Saab, to my mind, CSR funding cannot be the solution to the problem at all of our social sector investment requirements. The way to go is merely, a public-private partnership. Next slide. The traditional financing model have failed, in my very humble opinion, because they were not outcome oriented and based, and therefore not channelized. Hamza, next slide, please. So it was not outcome based, and they were not channelized adequately towards the areas where they were supposed to be channelized. Next slide, Hamza. So we need to really reimagine the fiscal space that we are operating in. As I said, the world is actually now moving away from, well, not moving away, but constrained to having a dried up their conventional fiscal resources, funding sources, to now debt driven, as we've seen the debt growing many folds in the last 3 decades particularly. We need to figure out how we can also leverage debt in the overall scheme of things to support the social sector investments. And in this context, in the traditional infrastructure framework, they do exist, but the social sector frameworks are still lacking. Now, next slide. Now, what are the typical alternate sources which are available globally and is being used extensively? Hamza, next slide, please. Is being used. For example, there are 4 or 5 that I've listed here, but frankly speaking, these are very fluid structures, and they vary from country to country, offering to offering, social sector requirement to social sector requirement. It is not something which is carved in stone that this is the structure that one needs to follow. These are principally the ideas which then can be tweaked based on the requirement of the social sector investment of that particular country or the project that we are talking about. The most popular one is obviously the blended financing. Blended financing is an overarching term. So the other 4 that are 3 at least are listed, 2, 3, and 4 that are listed are actually a subset of the blended financing. And the blended financing is essentially means that either in the form of the guarantee or as such taking the funding risk, the philanthropic or the multilateral or the DFI come through and work with the commercial organizations to tap into something which is unconventional nature. In the infrastructure space, blended finance has been used extensively. Social sector is still at the peripheries. On the social impact bond, it is something which is squarely towards the social impact financing and not infrastructure as such. जो मैं पहले blended finance की बात कर रहा था, that is infrastructure but social impact focused. The second one is squarely on the social sector investment standpoint, and it is actually the idea here is to involve primarily the commercial organizations to come and participate, and also make the interest of all the stakeholders who are involved in the equation, starting from the delivery partners to the investor and to the outcome funder. Everybody has to have some kind of stake and skin in the game to make sure that the outcome is more concrete and insured. I will talk about it a little later, detail later. In Pakistan, the first social impact bond has already been commissioned, and we are expecting the funding to be channelized in the next 2 to 3 months. This third one is the social success notes, which are pretty similar to the social impact bonds, but typically the investor type is very different. In the social impact bond, we try and encourage the commercial investors to come through. In the social success notes, we essentially have the concessional financing agencies to come through and support the funding. Social impact guarantees, as I said, in the blended financing, we have a classic example of Infrazam in Pakistan. We have the classic example of recently set up an entity called NCGCL, which is National Credit Guarantee Company Limited. And Grandco has been active in Pakistan for the last 10 years. In fact, more than 10 years. I brought them into Pakistan in 2023. It's an FCDO company whereby they provide the guarantees for infrastructure financing with the social development focus. Last but not the least are the typical, philanthropic initiatives. Pakistan has a funding, well, official funding pool of around 25 billion rupees, but the unofficial, funding pool are enormous in nature. All new concepts and ideas are still being explored and being worked on. Now, on the blended financing side, I've already talked about a bit on this one. The thing which has been lacking in the past, next slide, Hamza. The thing has been lacking in the past
Zafar
is
Saab,
related to the.
may I request if you can in 3 to 4 minutes? Please.
Yes, sure. So one piece is the de-risking piece is taken care of, but the outcome assessment is still lacking in this space. And therefore, this has to be thought in a different manner. Agli wali slide pe aa jao, Hamza. This is, and typically in this blended finance, jo mere samne example mein nazar aati is the government ki guarantee coming through in various projects, government of Punjab, government of Pakistan, all those guarantees coming through in this space to act as the blended finance. As you can see, when we get the blended finance, the guarantee from the government of Punjab, we have a substantial impact on the social financing. I leave that presentation with you, Dr. Saab. People can see the figures. I will not dwell into details. It's an enormous impact. All I want to tell you is that we are going for an impact assessment of this with LUMS in the next 2-3 months. Next is the social impact bond. Social impact bond, I've already talked about this in detail earlier. All I can tell you is, as I said, typically it's needed to attract the local, the foreign investors. Hamza, change karo slide. To attract the commercial lenders. And next slide, please. And in Pakistan, I'm very pleased to share with all of you that we are in the process of going for the first social. Next slide, Hamza. Social impact bond, first ever social impact bond with NAFTAC, where the BAT and government of and Bank of Punjab are the advisor. Now, Hamza, next slide, please. Next slide.
Zafar Saab, are you there?
Doctor, I got dropped. But I'll cover a couple of more slides. The rest I'll leave the presentation with you. This is the first social impact bond which is being contemplated in Pakistan. Bank of Punjab is the advisor with the British Asian Trust. In this, the education outcome would be the employment, not the skill development outcome will be the employment and not the conventional way of financing. I will now jump to Social success net notes मैंने आपसे already discuss कर लिया हुआ है. Guarantees I've already talked about. Philanthropic CSR funding we've already talked about. I will now jump to the slide 18, where I'm talked about the China model. The China is the real role model in this whole space. And the message I want to leave behind is the change of the culture and the social mindset, which has resulted in China's success, where 800 people have been brought out of poverty, and the substantial improvement has been seen in the HDI. The primary two things in this slide, one, Dr. Saab, is the cultural and the social mindset change, and the other one is the devolution of power. The accountability at the lower level is actually something which makes sure that the outcome all throughout. It's not just the financial outcome; it is the outcome of the performance as well. Last slide, Dr. Saab, I'm glad to share with you that, and I must thank you for organizing this event, for organizing this webinar. I wish we had more time because, for social sector, I don't think we dedicate and invest enough time that it deserves. I'm extremely thankful to you. At least we are thinking on those directions. And once we start thinking on those lines, I'm pretty sure that we will get to that point very, very soon. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab.
Zafar Saab, thank you. And really well noted that we really need more time, and I'm sure my team will be engaging with you for some more dedicated discussions with Bank of Punjab on the excellent work that you are doing, and also sharing. Thank you for sharing some experiences, particularly from China. Well, we have some questions. We will be putting it to you on email and connecting to the questions. Thank you so much. But for more to listen on this one, let me now invite Dr. Saima Bashir. She is member, Social Sector and Devolution, Ministry of Planning, Development and Special Initiatives, a very hardcore demographic and social investment person. So over to you, Dr. Saima, for special remarks on the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sajid Amin. And first of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank you because this is, as Dr. Abed and you yourself in opening remarks talked about, that this dialogue or discussion is both timely and essential in the current context. And in the start, I just want to highlight that as the member social sector and devolution and planners at the federal level, we are constantly navigating the tension between the urgent need to invest in human development and the fiscal constraints that limit our ability to do so, particularly at scale. So before moving forward, I just want to highlight that this, if we look at, and I think Dr. Faisal Rashid has discussed it earlier, that this year the Federal Public Sector Development Program has been finalized with an outlay of 1 trillion rupees, including rupees 270 billion in foreign assistance, covering over 1,100 projects. Yet, if we look at this envelope, allocation for education, health, social welfare, and human rights is quite modest. And this is concerning if we look at the demographic structure of our population, because almost nearly 2/3 of our population is under the age of 30. And if we look at the poverty incidence, then nearly 40% of these our population is multidimensionally poor. Such figures reflect that not just fiscal choices, but a deeper development imbalances. And because the current today's dialogue is mainly towards the investment in child focus activities, so we also know that children comprise nearly 40% of Pakistan's population, and that represent our greatest asset for a sustainable and inclusive future. But as everybody else highlighted, that if we look at the investment and the outcomes of children, then we see that around 26 million of our children aged 5 to 16 are out of school, 40% of children under 5 are stunted. And as Dr. Sajid Amin already pointed out, that if a child is born in a poor family, then there are 68% chances of being a poor rest of their life. If we look at the progress, then we must acknowledge that some progress has been made in prioritizing human capital, but public investment are still not fully aligned with the development needs of children and youth. And as the public expenditure reviews over the years show limited improvements in
Dr. Sama, are you there? If you're speaking, your mic has been muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. So
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Where was I when it got muted? Since the start?
Please go ahead. It was 68% chances of being poor if you are born to be poor.
Okay, so I'm sorry for that. I was just mentioning that while some progress has already been made in prioritizing human capital, public investments are still not fully aligned with the development needs of children and youth. And as public expenditure reviews over the years show that limited improvement in child-focused spending across provinces, while KP show modest upward trend of a 0.1 percentage point increase in child-focused spending, but we see that Balochistan and Sindh are struggling in meeting the required investment in line with actual budgets. Even if we look at Punjab, the most socially developed province, child-focused spending declined from 1.7% to 1.3% of provincial GDP between 2017-18 to 21-22. So that indicates the need for renewed emphasis in budget allocation. Similarly, if we look at that, much of our investment is in education and health, and the critical sectors such as nutrition, social protection, WASH remain severely underfunded and are not strategically planned from the perspective of a child's lens. Most of our spending in education and health is again recurrent in nature, leaving little room for strategic high-impact investment that can transform outcomes. Fiscal policy shifts have tended to be reactive, often linked to crisis or temporary foreign aid inflows, resulting in short-lived gains rather than a sustainable reform. At the same time, provinces remain heavily dependent on federal cash transfer under the NFC award, constraining their fiscal autonomy to upscale social investments. I totally believe that if we are to achieve meaningful outcomes for children and youth and meet our SDG and UDAN framework commitments, we need to fundamentally rethink how we finance the social sector. Public finances alone will not be enough, as all the speakers talked about that. We must build a broader financing ecosystem that blends private, public, philanthropic, and community capital. And Zafar Saab has talked about it in depth. Innovative financing mechanisms such as earmark taxes or health and nutrition levies, public-private partnerships beyond infrastructure, and result-based financing linked to measurable outcomes can provide new pathways. Greater integration of donor funding into medium-term budget framework is also critical to ensure alignment and sustainability. We must also explore culturally resonant solutions. For instance, formalized instruments for zakat and wakaf can create sustainable funding streams for health and social welfare. Climate finance, traditionally directed towards infrastructure and energy, we have seen that most of the climate financing is going in these areas, should begin to support child and gender-sensitive social infrastructure. At the same time, it is equally important to untap potential of diaspora-backed social bonds and scoop linked to education, maternal health, and clean water, sectors that directly influence human well-being. However, innovation in financing must be accompanied by transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness to ensure that reforms do not lead to inequalities or dilute public sector responsibilities. And Zafar Saab has talked about it in depth, that accountability mechanism need to be in place for having a sustainable and innovative financing. Fiscal space is not simply a positive outcome of macroeconomic arithmetic. It is a deliberate reflection of our national priorities. And under UDAN framework, Ministry of Planning and Development and Government of Pakistan has now realized that if Pakistan want to progress, And to have a sustainable progress with this huge demographic dividend we have, we need to invest strategically in the social and human capital of our population. And if we continue to treat the social sector as a cost, it will always be underfunded. So we need to recognize it as the engine of resilience and productivity. We must be prepared to allocate and innovate accordingly. And therefore, today's webinar is an opportunity to chart a forward-looking dialogue on sustainable and innovating financing for social sector investment. And I look forward to working with all the stakeholders to shape actionable, context-specific solutions that show investments in children, adolescents, and youth are not just safeguarded, but strategically enhanced. A Pakistan that invests in its a Pakistan, if it invests in its people, is a Pakistan that secures its future. So I once again thank you for providing me this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the policy brief, which as an outcome of this today's discussion, and to discuss in detail what we can do to have a sustainable financing, alternative financing to improve the outcomes of social sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saima, for really emphasizing on investments in children, health, education, and skill developments. And we look forward to continue working with you. We're also, before I invite the next panelist, we're really receiving a huge appreciation from the people, those who have really joined us from online as well, in terms of the timeliness and the need of this discussion. But let me sort of channelize these thanks where actually they belong to, and let's join me in appreciating UNICEF to really come forward and take the lead on this very sort of needed discussion on investing in our children. And we really appreciate the work that UNICEF is really doing on this public finances aligned to the children need, social investments, and all this today's discussion and a series of discussion that we will be having is really UNICEF's one of the, I mean, great initiative that was really needed, and we're really thankful to Mr. Joshua and the Sadaf Zulfikar and our team for coming up with this one. So the partner of today's discussion and the other discussions. So this was our first half, particularly in terms of a special remarks, the opening. So we will be now moving the second half. That's a more kind of a moderated discussions, as Dr. Saima also mentioned, and Zafar Saab also mentioned on Chinese experiences. Innovation is always learning from others, the good things, learning from the peers, learning from the global experiences, that how can we innovate, how did the others do, and for this, we are really joined by the most, I think, given the experiences, the suitable person here, Mr. Francesco Savero. I hope I am pronouncing it right. He is Principal Advisor for Innovative and Alternative Financing for Children, IF4C at UNICEF, roughly 2.5 decades experience in mobilizing resources and sort of multi-diverse experiences. So to share global experiences, your thoughts, what can Pakistan learn from global experiences? Over to you, Mr. Francesco.
Thank you, Dr. Shahid, and panelists and attendants. Thank you for inviting me and us. I think, as you say, this is very timely. And I want to share, I was in Seville at the Conference for Finance for Development with actually the Minister of Finance. And I have to say, there were like about 8 ministers of finance, and he was the most vocal in making the case that investing in children it's a question of survival of country. It's not just a question of surplus, or it's a question of nice to have. And so it was being very also humbling to hear his call for action, also on the need for technical capacity in countries to look for alternatives. So I'll try to share my few remarks here. Hope you can see that.
Yes, we can see. Please go ahead.
Perfect. And so the basic discussion here is that, the question as usual in the world is not the lack of resources, it's how the resources are generated, allocated. And we've been already, some of the panelists mentioned that the amount of assets that actually in the world that are actually allocated between asset under management, insurance, and other type of investments clearly far exceed the opportunities and the needs in different countries. On the other side, as you may aware, the so-called ODA, Official Development Assistance, that was already in decline, particularly for middle-income country, has been recently even further reduced, not only by the US, but also by a number of European countries at the tune of estimated $60 billion in the next future. But on the other side, if you look on the positive, the so-called social and sustainable bonds reach $1 trillion issuance in value. So this is a sustainable asset class that looks more and more to tie to the financial performance and the impact to specific environmental and social outcome. The so-called catastrophic bonds and insurance-linked securities, so instruments that help countries to respond to catastrophes and climate change-related, has also reached a point of $7 trillion issuance every year, showing that this is also an asset class that established. And so this is just to say that while we're looking at the finance from various angles, we can look for the shortage of financing and funding. We can look into the bad allocations of resources, inefficient allocation, but it's also things as an opportunities. And we convinced that, what is in this world is not the capital or the opportunities, is the way these are allocated. I think Dr. Zafar also mentioned in his talk about this. So for UNICEF, the sustainable finance for children has substantially 5 main opportunities or areas that we also look to discuss in this panel and further down in Pakistan. These are solutions that have been explored in the last 10 to 20 years, but as somebody of the panelists said, rarely for children. And here is not a battle of infrastructures against children or climate against children. The two are together. Of course, we need infrastructure for children and we need climate solution for children. But sometimes we see solutions that are rarely trickle down to the benefit to children and their families. So these 5 solutions, and I quickly touch base and happy to discuss further. Of course, one is the sovereign debt solution for children. We mentioned in one of the first panelists that Pakistan is facing 50% of the revenue we heard are going to only servicing the debt, $30 billion in short payment. This is something that clearly is the elephant in the room. There are not a single solution for that, but there are some potential solutions that I will briefly illustrate that can also benefit children, particularly on nutrition, health, and education. The second part is also outcome-based financing. This is solutions where the investors substantially accept a lower interest or return, or just a return only if certain results are achieved. And this we think is as a potential, Dr. Zafar also mentioned in his intervention. Impact investing blended finance, this is where we really can drive private capital investing in local solutions, local small and middle enterprises, supplier financing. Challenge investing is how we help private capital, private enterprises to look to prioritize children in their investment. And finally, but not least, is a climate risk financing. This is something that is particularly relevant for Pakistan. If I must say, summarizing as this double burden of this huge debt servicing, which is aggravated by the constant climate-related, more frequent events, from flooding to earthquakes to typhoons. So if you see in a spectrum, of course, we look to a more long-term development that looks at a solution that needs to invest for a long term, to a much more emergency response recovery. But all the solutions are in a spectrum, because you cannot just put, like we say, a bandage on the debt while you're facing a solution emergency in a park because there is a flooding or an earthquake. You have to have a series of instruments that are able to make it sustainable, this response to the various challenges. So the first example in the climate space is what we call Today and Tomorrow, which is the first parametric insurance to help the countries to respond to the frequent climate change related events, in particularly typhoons. And Pakistan is one of them. Because when there is an event like a typhoon or flooding, a drought, or an earthquake, there are many issues, but one of the issues is that you need to find the money to respond to this emergency. It's very difficult to raise more donors' money in this climate. And more important, these resources are arriving too late. When there is an emergency, you need these resources in the first 24, 36 hours to respond effectively. So these solutions that UNICEF has put together with some partners like the World Bank and other partners is substantially has two sides. One, of course, is investing in resilience, preparedness to mitigate the impact of climate change. But on the other side, it's a parametric insurance, meaning that when the wind speed reaches a certain level, based on the number of children affected in that area, the insurance immediately release the money to respond. And so, meaning that basically with this mechanism, UNICEF in the ground with the government in 24, 36 hours has the resources to respond to typhoon. So it's quite very effective instruments and is also is a parametric, meaning that there's no discussion with the insurer to assess the damage. As soon as the event happened and there are a number of children affected, the money are transferred to respond immediately. We with the first year of these pilots that include actually 8 countries, we've been able to develop more than $11 million in rapid response, responding to 23 cyclones in 8 countries. And again, I mean, this one of the elements that is very important here is that this is a very efficient way, because in 36 hours, the money are released to respond to emergencies. Some of these resources are also used to build more resilient infrastructure. So therefore, it's not just pure emergency, but it's also served to the building more infrastructure. The second example about the outcome financing, outcome bonds, is this polio solution for $500 million that we set up with the European Investment Bank and the Gates Foundation. And the way it works is, and Pakistan is one of the, as you know, one of the few countries with Afghanistan where still polio is endemic. So there is a need to complete the eradication of the polio in this country while we respond to the wild variant. That means there are in many other countries where there are outbreaks. In order to do that, this mechanism, essentially, we have a bank that front load the $500 million to UNICEF and WHO. So we get the money right away. And then based on the certain indicators, there are the number of cases of polio, the outbreaks, the number of commodities. If we reach them, the European Commission pays back the European Investment Bank. If we don't reach those targets, the Gates Foundation pay back the European Investment Bank. So as you can see, this mechanism has 2 advantages. One, they put a large sum of money up for work up front, so you don't have to wait the approval, the reporting, etc. But secondly, you get 2 outcome funders, so 2 donors that take the risk to pay back, but only based on certified results. So this is a mechanism that is also, we think, is very interesting to potentially replicate. We had $500 million. We've been able to respond to 45 and plus outbreak around the world in 13 plus countries. So it's another element to look how we can try and make an outcome-based financing model for health, in this case for polio. And we try to apply the same logic to now connecting schools. So a bond were issued by the World Bank, and the interest on this bond for the investors are only going to be paid based on the number of schools that are connected to internet. Or in another case where we're working now on solarizing some health facilities, the repayment of the investor only happen if there are the number of solar panel in place and the number of emissions are certified and reduced. So again, these are examples how this mechanism can work also for education and health. Finally, as we call the elephant in the room, the $30 billion that Pakistan is facing, 50% of the we heard of the revenues, tax revenues. There are no silver bullet. This has been one of the main topic also in Seville conference. We found that it's really the most urgent challenge that we have, because as you can see, and this is as we have seen is very similar in Pakistan, there are more money goes to pay the interest or the servicing the debt that goes to education, investment, and health combined. So this is clearly show that is not sustainable for the country, but it's not sustainable for children. So there are evidence where there is a strict correlation statistically between a debt prolonged situations and the child mortality. Actually, the more the debt situation is prolonged, the more child mortality goes up. So it's a question of really survival. We got a couple of potential solution that also has been discussed in Seville. One is the bilateral swaps. One of the largest share of debt is still owned by so-called Paris Club. Particularly, China doesn't really do swap or renegotiation, but there's Saudi Arabia and others. One example we did in Egypt, for instance, is with the German creditor that is BMZ and KfW. We renegotiate some part of an outstanding debt, 30% of 100 million, that has been instead allocated, instead of being repaid back, has been allocated to UNICEF World Food Program to respond to the host community to Sudanese refugee. And the interesting part here is that the Germans agreed because there are some clear outcomes that are independently assessed and evaluated. So the money are not just go back simply to the government budget, but they go to very clear outcome and program that are certified. And a much more needed, if you want to scale, and I finish here, solutions to the debt is what we're working now with few sovereign countries in Africa and also in this region. And it's substantially, how can we use substantially to help the country to buy back some of the outstanding debt, particularly from the Eurobond and other bondholders, with a credit enhancement that allow the country to buy back at discount. Those savings then are invested into specific nutrition and health program that UNICEF and other partners guarantee that's going to be achieved. In this case, to give you an example, we're working on $1 billion of existing Eurobond debt. They're going to be purchased back at the discount, and they're going to be generate $350 million saving. They're going to be into routine immunization and life-saving nutrition supplies. And the way this potential thing works, because even in Pakistan, large part of the debt is now owned by private creditors and private bondholders, because you have a set of credit enhancement that comes from a numbers of development finance institutions, international finance institutions, and private that help the country to being able to buy them back, and also be with the fact that there is a very clear allocation of those savings into child outcomes. I want to conclude, and thanks again for this opportunity, with what the Minister of Finance of Costa Rica said in Seville at our panel. Will also Minister Aurangzeb was there. And the Minister of Costa Rica said, a country becomes great when the elders plants trees for shadow under which they will never sit under. And I think it's a beautiful image to what investing in children is and what is need to be done. And thanks again for the time and invitation.
Thank you, Francisco, bringing us some very interesting and very kind of in the business now people are in terms of debt swaps and other. I think the good part is that there is now realization on the global financial architect as well, including IMF, IDB and others, that the investments in children are the overall social investments. Debt is really becoming the biggest hurdle barrier to social investments. And there is so much discussion, and I hope that our teams, colleagues from UNICEF and SDPI will be bringing good policy proposals that we can take to Planning Commission and Ministry of Finance to take more forward the innovative solutions that you have been suggesting. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me now take this discussion forward. Another thread which really also somewhere or the other is also linked to the debt problem. That is the climate change. Climate change is really driving itself, the debt problem. And to see how climate financing that looks as an opportunity, and the world is really taking this as one of the opportunity to move on the climate financing and how it can be aligned to social investments. So we are joined for this Mr. Ali Tawqir Sheikh, a well-known climate change expert and member board of directors loss and damage fund. He has been a vocal sort of voice on financing resilience and aligning it to vulnerable communities, including children and women. So over to you, Ali Tawqir Sheikh Saab. How can we align these climate financing, alternative financing to the children-centric expenditures and financing? Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to be part of this very important conversation. I've benefited immensely from these conversations. I think your colleagues have my presentation.
It is on screen. Can you see?
Not yet, but waiting. Yes.
Great.
Now,
go ahead,
given
please.
the time constraint, I just wish to make 2 points. First point is that health, education, nutrition are part of our NDC, but not very strongly pronounced. As author of the NDC, I was reviewing it before this webinar, and I feel the timing is just right because NDC implementation has become part of RSF, on which Government of Pakistan will be responding. So this is a good opportune time to do advocacy, to include education, health, and children's issues more strongly in the NDC, so there's a frequent reporting. I also feel that it's my personal view, and many of you may not like, that public finance should be the only source, at least the fundamentally primary source, like defense, for investments. It should not hinge on our success in securing international finance or climate finance. Like defense, it is an important part that all of us have to be very, very supportive. Now, given the time constraint, let me begin with my last slide and work my way up, requesting your colleagues to take me to the last slide. And I'll stop where my time finishes, one above this. Now, this box will tell you where we are and where we are aspiring to go. On the one axis is our ambition, and the other ambition is our capacity. We are presently in the first box, whereby our capacity to access finance is overly limited. And from international supporters, we look for concessional finance or TAs or budgetary support. Oftentimes, TAs and others end up in loans. We need to move from this box to the final box where both ambition and the capacity are higher, and we can seek guarantees, equity, risk sharing, insurance mechanisms, parametric insurance, cat bonds, pre-arranged finance, contingent credit, and others. Many of these instruments have been mentioned there by my colleagues earlier. In order to get there, we will need to go to a box where our capacity is higher in terms of direct access, domestic climate taxes, revenue, FDI, and operationalizations of national climate finance strategy. That unless we develop that capacity, we cannot graduate to the higher level. So this is, in my view, a think piece for us to all think. It's very easy for us to say that we need blended finance, but anybody can say that. The question is, how do we get there? And that will be contingent upon our capacity transformation and reform and the willingness for reform. Slide above this. Talking about children and all that, nobody stopped us from accessing children-related climate finance from GCF and other financing windows. I have reviewed GCF, and I can say with confidence that many other countries have accessed climate finance from GCF and bilateral donors and MDBs and safe climate investment funds in the categories that I mentioned. Any research assistant can fill this gap, fill this table to identify that how different donors have supported child-related issues and then prioritize our agenda for a specific financing window. It's not a rocket science. It's very simple to do so far as it's our priority. If it's not our priority, we'll keep looking for someone else to write our funding proposals. I've done this exercise. I do have some stats that have populated this table to figure out, but I think this is an important component for us. My purpose of this presentation is to highlight how to think about this issue. A slide above is another way of showing that how different types of financing is available in different categories, from grants to risk sharing. And I've given specific examples and advantages and disadvantages of each, and some specific considerations for Pakistan's point of view. Now, whatever is written in this table is by way of example. Others can disagree or agree, but the frame will help us think that how we can access guarantees or some other aspects. These are typologies of financing mechanisms that are available to Pakistan. A slide above shows, in my view, if we were to go to any financing windows for sectoral financing for, let's say, education or health, sectoral policies have not been climate proofed. Our climate finance infrastructure has still to be built. We have to strengthen partnerships in this domain of children, and then we have to mobilize private sector financing. And all of it will hinge on the pillar number 7, which is about education, which is about research and development. We cannot simply go and ask for money unless we know specifically why we don't need to that money and where it will be spent. And that's where the monitoring and learning elements come in that I mentioned. I think I can show you one more slide that will also tell us where the opportunities are and where the challenge is. It's a relatively old slide, but the latest data one can download from the website of this organization that produces it annually from CPI. But what you'll see is that almost all financing goes to mitigation. There's very little financing available for adaptation. If health and adaptation fall in health and education fall in adaptation realm, then you'll need to look at the fourth column that says uses. In adaptation and dual benefits, you will see there are opportunities available. And when you go and look at the last column, that's where you can build the linkages between child-related issues. A slide up. These are the instruments. Other colleagues have spoken about it. I knew that these are the names, but real thing is whether or not we can develop our capacity for these instruments or not. Slide up. There are several alternative financing mechanisms available. As I mentioned, GCF alone has submitted, I have approved several children-related projects. And based on that, I want to submit 4 propositions and I'll conclude on that. Pakistan has secured 6 or 8 projects from GCF by way of example. Several of them are by UN agencies. And I think there's a possibility for retrofitting education and health in existing projects. And from the existing portfolios, such as a $70 million project from BRACE, for BRACE, and climate health resilience project from Malawi, retrofitting is a possibility. I think there is a space available for us to developing dedicated climate education health proposals. We have not so far. These can be developed. Third, there's a space for linkages with multi-sectoral proposals. They may be with water, they may be with urban planning, they may be with infrastructure, they may be with resilience, flooding, or what have you. And finally, partnering with industry leaders. There are many eminent players nationally and regionally with which Pakistan can partner, including several CSOs that have been very successful dealing with children issues and accessing GCF. A slide up, please. And these were 3 tracks that I think were critical to access. If we look at education and health as sectors and without whole of government approach, we cannot go very far because health and education, regrettably, are not our priorities. In the 1.2 trillion rupees worth of our PSDP allocation this year, health and education are absent. And that's clearly our public policy that ignores health. And therefore, we need a whole of government approach. And nobody should pay Pakistan. Not only that, nobody will pay Pakistan unless we leverage domestic revenue and investments. So both public sector investments and private sector investments need to come as our equity. And that equity we can hopefully leverage to access international finance. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier in my subsequent slides, diversify sources of international climate finance and investments. And there are many people have mentioned. One slide up. Just leave that barriers aside. All of you know. A slide up. And these were the 3 objectives that I have tried to cover in these slides. I don't know how successful I was, but these are 3 objectives of my presentation to you. Bottom line, again, since it is not our national priority, it has to be embedded in other projects. It has to be supported by our national leveraging of resources, PSDP financing and others. And very, very importantly, windows are available to retrofit some of the projects that we have already accessed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali Takir Sheikh Saab. for bringing us what needs to be done, what are the options that are available that we can build on. But before I invite our next speaker, Sayyid Mashood Rizvi Sahab, let me leave you and Francisco for a quick question that I'll come later to you. What are the top three things that we need to do actually on ground? For example, you gave us options that we need to do whole of the government approach. What is that we UNICEF and SDPI need to do to take this message to government, to the relevant departments? So if you can highlight three bullet point recommendations that UNICEF and SDPI need to do together uh, to push aligning climate financing with the children center investments, social investments. So that I leave with you. And but also for the Francisco, I'll be coming to you to ask. You have given a list, a very good list of 4 or 5 options that we do have. Given your global experiences, where do you think Pakistan stands right now? What should be the priority order? Where should we start from? Which option we should build first on, and then second and third? For example, that swaps may be a good option, but very, very time-taking procedure. So if you can give us a priority options, that this is the immediate where Pakistan can start with. These are low-hanging fruits. I know there are no in these kind of financing innovations. So I'll leave with you 2 questions and I'll be coming to you second round. So let me now invite our next speaker, Mr. Sayyid Mashood Rizvi, Executive Director, Communications and Resource Development, Indus Hospital and Health Network, IHHN. And he will be sort of guiding us on how the private sector can play its role through CSR initiatives or the philanthropic activities in terms of complementing this public service delivery, particularly on health and aligned with other education and other social investments. So over to you if you can guide us. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, and it's an honor to be here and to be in the company of some of my mentors and old colleagues such as Ali Toki Saab. And thank you for having Indus Hospital participate in this very, very critically important discussion. Given the time constraint, I reduced the slideshow to 2 only, and one is right in front of you. So at the Indus Hospital, we basically talk about 6 C's. 5 you see on your screen, I hope you do. And the 6th one will be revealed shortly. So given that we are Pakistan's largest private sector, not-for-profit healthcare provider, with 111 primary care centers across the country, managing more than 13 hospitals, managing regional blood centers, rehabilitation centers, and building Pakistan's largest university of health sciences, treating more than 500,000 patients every month, free of cost. We have come to a realization, and this word has been used repeatedly in this seminar also, that it is nothing short of a catastrophe that health is for the people of Pakistan. Technically speaking, catastrophe is the next stage to a state of emergency. But we really don't see anyone at the helm of affairs declaring an emergency when it comes to the provision of healthcare for the masses of Pakistan. And it was even more dispiriting and discouraging and disappointing to note that some respectable speakers noted that the GDP allocation has gone further down when it comes to health expenditure and health allocation. So that's number 1. The second C refers to the crisis of lifestyle. So as people, we are subscribing to very unhealthy lifestyles, further burdening the disease burden across the country. Third, everyone has spoken about. It's the calamity of Pakistan is amongst the most vulnerable nations in the world for climate change. And that particular calamity actually furthers the burden on healthcare more than any other sector when it does happen. And Sajid Bhai, you also noted that Pakistan refuses to be ready, and our honorable speaker Saab also noted that it's on a perpetual snooze situation. So we are having to deal with the emergency situations and disasters and these calamities and trying to avert the health catastrophes as a result of that. But it doesn't stop there, unfortunately. It's a social capitulation tool now, the lack of provision of healthcare. Education can wait. Housing can wait. Provision of water and sanitation can wait. I'm talking life and death situation. And we have situations here at the Indus Hospital that our patients are unable to come to their routine appointments because they do not have the means to pay for the taxi or the rickshaw fare or to fuel their motorbikes. And unfortunately, they are pushed into absolute debt and destitute as a result of the lack of provision of healthcare and the ever-increasing burden of disease. As you can see on the screen, every year, more than almost 500,000 households are being pushed into poverty only and only because of health expenditure. So it's a very compounded, complex problem that the country is faced with. But unfortunately, the callousness of the attitudes, and we carefully selected the word callousness because इसका मतलब होता है बेरहम और careless का मतलब होता है लापरवाह. तो लापरवाही से आगे की सूरत हाल है, बेरहमी की सूरत हाल है. At the helm of affairs and the decision makers, unfortunately, have become completely callous to the disasters as well as the plight of the people. So in that light, the last C is that of choice. What kind of choices are we prepared to make? So the private sector is making its own choices. Indus Hospital made its own choices. Dr. Abdul Bari Khan and friends established this institution. And there are the likes of SIUT and Shaukat Khanam and LRBT and so on and so forth. In education, there are wonderful examples. But the inability of these organizations to come together, to break their silos, and to realize that health and environment are to be based at the center of their attention, irrespective of what area of the sector that they're working on, so that there can be a multi-sectoral impact, so that especially children and women and adults and elderlies of our society can be given a very holistic safety net. So we also continue to work in silos, unfortunately. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two, I would like to post here, is that of capacity. Even if we were to tap into the most remarkable resource, the religious obligation of Muslims, which is being projected at about $1 trillion a year that Muslims countries actually roll out zakat. Even if we were to tap into that, do we have the capacity to channel that particular resource into transformative and sustainable institutional building for children, women, and elders? I'm afraid to tell you we don't. So it's a smokescreen and an elusive dream. I guarantee that if $1 trillion is put on the table of Pakistan today, Pakistan will further struggle to utilize and channel that resource into any significant sustainable capacity building for education, for health, and for all the ills that everybody has very, very aptly talked about. Pakistan, unfortunately, on the zakat front, I am not very proud to report that Pakistanis are one of the lower strata of Muslim countries fulfilling the obligation of zakat. The collectability potential of Pakistan in zakat alone is 4 to 6% of the GDP. But unfortunately, Pakistan collects less than 10% of its potential collectible zakat every year. And they obviously, these are stats which are becoming more and more authentic. Lastly, when it comes to the question of CSR by corporates, I'm afraid the question that we must put in front of the corporates is deep versus wide. The habit of CSR by the corporates is a habit of going wide rather than deep. They would like to have a lot of coverage and to sort of, sprinkle the CSR left, right, and center rather than with a consolidated approach, as Zafar Saab highlighted in his presentation. So my plea also to the corporates and through this policy paper is to prioritize the vulnerable groups of Pakistan, i.e. children, women, and elderly. So I'd like to stop here and once again would like to thank SDPI for inviting Indus Hospital to this very important seminar.
Thank you. Thanks to UNICEF and SDPI to making this event possible and bringing our colleagues on board. So thank you so much for the first round. Very insightful discussions, but we would like to, as I mentioned, have some follow-up questions. And in this regard, we'll request if we can have just bullet point responses, because we really have to prepare a document for the government. And we would really like to listen your thoughts. What exactly needs to be done? What are the exact options that we need to push on? So as I mentioned, let me begin this with Mr. Francisco as on the best global practices. What are the key exact options, 2 to 3 options that you think the government of Pakistan or the Pakistan can build on immediately, and it's ready for these options to improve these outcomes of solutions compared to the other countries? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sajid. A very, very complex question, but I mean, I'll try to answer with a couple of suggestions. One, I think is moving the discussions about children outcomes and children KPIs, because that's what is needed for any potential solution and option that we have. So instead of looking to only the instruments or the opportunities, the important thing is the measurability of outcomes and KPIs that are linked to children, because any of these instruments require that, because that's what the investors, that's what the donors want. If you can show that you can actually measure and direct some of the of these resources towards measurable outcomes for children, that's where there is the biggest opportunity. So that would be my first suggestion: transform the ambition and the challenge into outcomes for children, and then be measurable and attach the financial solution to that. That would be the first thing. In terms of prioritization, it's very clear from the discussion and also from my discussion with the ministers in Seville that Pakistan has this double burden to facts. There are interlink. It's difficult to delink the debt from the climate situation. Therefore, even if there's no one solution, I think that any solution that combine a debt swap and debt restructuring with the allocation of savings in resilient health, education, and social protection will be something that could have the scale, because we're talking here, the scale of Pakistan is facing should be the scales of billions of dollars, the impact and the sustainability, because using whatever debt savings into a more resilient education schools, and also transition from school to work with a particular attention and investment in what we call in the green skilling or green rising. So preparing the new generation not only to find a job, but to find a job that is adapting into this new world of solution and economy to respond to climate change. So these are for me the two. So first question is transforming the needs and the opportunity into child outcomes, measurable outcome and then see what instruments are more adapted. And on prioritization, I would just say, and this is not just me, say the obvious, but Pakistan needs a large-scale solution for sustainable debt that then will release resources to face more resilience, preparation to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. Before I invite Ali Takir Sheikh, as I mentioned, what are exactly 2-3 things that we need to do? And also if we can touch upon some of the recent developments in terms of application of carbon credits, green bonds, in terms of looking at a social sector investment through the lens of social entrepreneurship and sustainable finance tools, how ready is Pakistan in terms of carbon credits and other using them as a tool to align social investments with these new carbon financing tools. I'll leave a question for Faisal Saab and also Dr. Saima if she is still there. How can the government or how can we push sort of a compulsory or mandatory social investment sizes? I mean, is there a legislation needed? Is there an act needed? Or there is already existing some legislations or rules which are loosely followed or not followed? What can be done? Because the situation is very bleak in terms of social investments, and leaving it on improving non-development expenditures and then improving social investments, I think is a no choice. It's very long-term strategy. What can be done in short term to push middle and particularly provincial governments to align public finances and the public expenditure with the children-centric social investments? So Ali Takir Saab, first you, and then I'll come to Faisal Saab. Ali Takir Saab, are you there?
Ji, thank you very much. These are very complex questions. From the public policy point of view, I think I learned from Masood several years ago that dropout is in effect, in reality, a walkout. So the first area of investment is to invest in the quality of life so that it becomes attractive. Government of Pakistan is not interested to produce good quality students so far. They're looking at good quality infrastructure struggle. So that's one. Second is that the role for SDPI and UNICEF and for others is not to take up what Government of Pakistan is paid by the taxpayers to do. Your job as think tank and the UN agency's job is to help with advocacy and with some research. Therefore, fundamentally, a role of advocacy is very important because these are ignored issues. Third, in terms of allocations, because it's an ignored area, it will sound very provocative, but I think it can be determined in our next finance bill that increase or decrease in our education will be proportionate to increase and decrease in our defense budget. Because external and internal defense are intrinsically linked. We are not against increasing defense budgets. That's a national priority. But at the same time, education is also a priority. And finally, in terms of different instruments for international finance, as I mentioned earlier, there's no barrier. The only barrier is that government Pakistan has to think that education is a provincial issue. Education is a provincial issue, and therefore the provinces need to take lead on this, and they need to determine their priorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Faisal Saab, if you can come in very briefly
So I think Sajid Sahab, responding to your question, you know that provincial governments are autonomous in terms of their budgeting and expenditure management. So it would be tough to have a legislation that will actually restrict their powers. But I feel that one of the problems that we had in the Seventh National Finance Commission Award was that we increased provincial resources significantly, but no conditions were actually put about the performance of the provincial governments. And I think the time is now ripe that in the next National Finance Commission Award, there should be some conditions about quantity and quality of provincial expenditure on education and health. And that is the right way through which we can actually create incentives for provincial governments to actually pay more attention towards education and health and try to improve the quality of their expenditures. The quality of expenditure is the key. We cannot sort of multiply our resources for these sectors very quickly. We can try to sort of increase them as much as possible, but as we have discussed earlier, I think it is the quality of expenditure that is important. We need to target our resources in the right areas.
Thank you. Please also do see the chat boxes. You can open if you have any questions regarding any of the panelists. The panelist can raise hand that there is a question from me, and I would.
Can I interject kindly with your permission?
Ji, please, Mashood Sahab.
Thank you for giving the time. I will lower my hand now. So basically, one comment that I think SDPI is most ideally placed. So we're talking about fiscal space. We should also talk about the public affairs space, particularly in the mainstream media, that exists today in Pakistan to talk about these pressing issues. Almost none. And that perpetuates the problem for people like us, because the voices of reason and sense and sensibility are literally nowhere to be found. People first have to be educated about what the challenges are. So I think if SDPI were to do a quick desktop study even as to how much time, airtime gets allocated in these plethora of channels, both public and private channels, on the issues that you are raising today, particularly that of children, women, and elderlies. One quick response to a question by Ms. Amber Fatima on the chat box is yes, public-private partnerships have worked, can work, but they have their own strings attached. The monster of government financing and the entire human capital, once it kicks in, public-private partnership doesn't necessarily always remain a symbiotic partnership. It requires a lot of navigation, but certainly there have been some island of excellences in Pakistan created through public-private partnership, but they are to be seen as a real sustainable option, not a quick fix option. So hopefully that also can open up. I have already spoken about zakat. Zakat is a very, very transformative tool, but unfortunately it's used as consumptive, i.e. only for disaster, not for long-term sustainable option. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Thank you. I think I have two general questions before I invite Ms. Sadaf Zulfikar Saiba for her key takeaways, and followed by Honorable Adnan Pasha Siddiqui Sahib, Advisor to Federal Minister for Finance and Revenue, for their thoughts. What can we do to make this child-centric public finances or expenditure or social investment more inclusive design in decision making? I mean, the discussion is more on a supply side, from top or bottom. How can we make it more inclusive? Any of you can come in. And also, lastly, if maybe Dr. Saima can touch upon how are we sort of planning to implementing some UN sort of conventions that we have signed severely, commitments of UN. So what is the government doing on or planning to do on it? Maybe that Saima Adnan Pasha Sahab can come on in their comments. But if any of our speaker has to add anything on it, please raise your hand, and in a minute, if you can contribute. So over to you, please, the panelists. How can we make it more inclusive? What needs to be done? Faisal Sahab, can you comment in terms of public financing decisions? What is the political economy and how we can make it more inclusive? Are there any sort of mechanisms in place?
I think even if we look at our open budget index, we see that we score very poorly on sort of inclusion part of budgeting. We do not consult with the public and stakeholders as much as we should. At the federal level, right now, our budgeting is very much fund-driven. IMF is dictating its terms. But I really feel that at the provincial level, there are opportunities, and the provincial governments need to come up with a system through which they can actually sort of be more inclusive in their decision making. They can use IT to get views from people on the schemes that are sort of initiated by the provincial governments, and sort of also the views of public on the monitoring and evaluation of those schemes. And that can help them improve their budget allocations and the quality of expenditure.
Thank you. I think this is a really important area because we recently completed a kind of a study or engagements with all the 4 provinces. And one thing that came on public finances, and particularly the expenditure planning, is all is done based on the trend analysis. The districts, the regions having, and the sectors having a higher allocation get a further higher allocation. They are just following the trend, the data-driven planning, and a more inclusive planning. That's really missing, and I think this is one point that we need to pick more on. If Dr. Saima is with us, and if she can add on the point, what's the government's plan to fulfill the UN commitments that Pakistan is a signatory of, if she is there. Okay, I think she's not. So let me now bring in Sadaf Zulfikar Saiba, OIC Chief Social Policy, UNICEF Pakistan. And if we can really have to pick one person behind all these discussions who came with idea from to conceptualization to implementation, she is one. So over to you, Sadaf, for the key takeaways for today's discussion before I invite Adnan Pasha sir. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sajid Amin and colleagues. Thank you very much for the very useful insights, contributions, and thoughts you have brought to this important agenda. While we were at UNICEF conceptualizing this dialogue, one important objective for us was to take a deeper dive and understand the examples of innovative alternate strategies and how they have impacted human and child-centered development in the country. After hearing the panelists and the speakers in the deliberations, it's very, very heartening to know that there are many important avenues and instruments for alternate financing that can expand physical space for social sector investments. The unique ideas and the perspectives and practical examples on debt swaps, impact bonds, and zakat presented by speakers speak of the potential that these can have for deepening child and human-centric investments. I want to echo what my colleague, Dr. Sajid, rightly mentioned in the beginning of the dialogue, that we are having this conversation at a very, very critical time for many reasons. If you look at the ongoing IMF dialogue on extended fund facility, the humanitarian situation the country is faced with every year, with recurring floods, and most importantly, in wake of recently released federal and provincial budgets, we do see that the challenged physical and macroeconomic landscape, the Pakistan stands at a very, very important juncture. The recent leadership of Pakistan government at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development is just the last month, where the Honorable Finance Minister co-chaired UNICEF's Global Side event, reaffirms the country's commitment to innovative, sustainable, and equity-focused financing for children. Pakistan experienced with shock-responsive safety nets, child nutrition insurance pilots, and climate-linked financing tools were showcased as emerging good practices and examples that we can take forward. Today's dialogue and contributions made by the panel builds on that particular momentum and reinforces our shared recognition that traditional financing approaches are no longer enough. Let me share the 4 key takeaways from today's conversation. Firstly, we must consider to institutionalize child-responsive public financing system underpinned by quality and quantity of social investments that through our traditional and non-traditional means of financing. We cannot stress and emphasize more on the importance of quality and quantity of social sector spending. As demonstrated through UNICEF-led public expenditure reviews, children are not keeping pace with the actual needs. Public finance for children must become a core lens in our budgeting processes from planning to execution. I also want to quote Ali Tokir Saab that public finance should have fundamental place in the overall budget framework, just like defense and interest payments. The diversified sources of climate resilience financing particularly will enhance the adaptive and mitigative measures and can also contribute to the whole of government approach. My colleague Francesco also rightly pointed the need for a large-scale debt management solution for sustainable and equitable physical space. It can really has the potential to transform the needs and opportunities into measurable outcomes for people and children. Secondly, the alternate financing mechanisms, of course, offer viable solutions, but they must be locally grounded. From green sukkos to Islamic social finance to impact bonds and climate levies, there's a growing menu of instruments that country can adapt and look into. It has to be carefully designed to align with the national system and embedded in the mid-term budgetary frameworks to ensure the physical sustainability and longevity of the commitments. We learned practical examples of debt swaps on skills and employability from Bank of Punjab, something to consider as a core instrument on the subject of alternate and innovation in financing. Thirdly, innovation must be equity-driven, transparent, and pro-poor. Whether financing and funding is sourced through partnerships, private capital, or international cooperation, it must reinforce the principles of inclusion, accountability, and state responsibility, something that my colleague Mishud Sab also pointed to. Strong safeguards are essential to ensure that new financing modalities do not widen inequities or bypass public systems. We heard the plight of healthcare system in the country and the burden of debt that millions of people are faced with. And we also heard about the potential of zakat contribution, which was noted to be roughly between 4 to 6%, and the potential it carries for transforming the life of people, and also pointing to the need for innovative and alternate health financing models. I mean, it can never be greater. The correlation between capability and ambition metrics will also remain in the play. We need to see how the ambition can be aligned with the reform efforts. That's a very consistent and ongoing effort we must all invest in and we must all prioritize. Colleagues, this webinar marks the starts of a broader national dialogue. Further sessions will take deeper dive into specific financing models, institutional reforms, and sectoral strategies. These dialogues aims to produce actionable context-specific solutions which are aligned with Pakistan's development agenda, the SDGs, and most importantly, the equity empowerment pillar of the Iran framework of Ministry of Planning, Development, and Special Initiatives. In closing, I would like to reiterate that this conversation highlights a growing consensus. Financing for children is not a cost, it is an investment in our collective future. UNICEF looks forward to work together with all stakeholders and translate this shared vision into practical pathways for policy and reform, and being the leading voice for children in equitable, innovative, and alternate financing models. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sadaf Saiba, and we really agree on that this is just a beginning of much needed discussion on children-centric financial planning. So let me now please join me in inviting Mr. Adnan Pasha, Honorables Adnan Pasha Siddiqui, Advisor to Federal Minister for Finance and Revenue, Ministry of Finance. Sir, over to you if you can just in your concluding remarks highlight initiatives that government of Pakistan and your ministry is taking, and particularly how can UNICEF and SDPI help and support to take those initiatives forward. Over to you, sir, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, Dr. Suleri, Dr. Sajid, the SDPI team, Francesco and Pragati, and the UNICEF team, esteemed and senior participants from the government of Pakistan, development sector. Professor Rashid Saab, good to see you here. Dr. Rizvi Saab, Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to take a bit of time. I know we're close, we've just gone past the lunchtime, but I will take about 10 minutes if that's okay. I'm just going to divide this up into what we see as the problem that we can try and address now. And I'm going to talk about the how part, and then how we can work together on this. And we can have much more participation when we work collectively on these things. Faisal Saab is aware of some of the stuff that the MOF has started to do because he's been involved and really helpful in the budget side. Now, this is for us a strategic area of growing concern in a rapidly evolving global scenario against a backdrop of a broader trend in international development finance. So I'm going to go sort of wide angle and then focus on Pakistan, right? Because this is not just Pakistan, it's an international issue, but we need to find local solutions, but build solutions from the ground up. The developing world at large is experiencing debt burdens nearly as high as the 1980s. And I've seen them, I'm not that young. So I've lived in Latin America and in Africa and in Pakistan for a bit. And this is going to be considered probably the next lost decade, right? For all of us in the developing world, especially from a human development perspective. So that's the negativity of it, but there are solutions. The finance minister has spoken about that as well at the last FFD, at the 4 in Seville. And it's very important for us all to recognize that the world, as we head towards Bayen in Brazil in November, that people have solutions, right, to attract funding, but also find local sources of funds to complement and build out, where the fiscal space isn't available. And that's the core topic here, especially for Pakistan. For us, in my view, there are two existential threats to Pakistan: population, the way it's growing, and then climate. Both impact the future of the well-being of children and future generations to come. Both need to be addressed collectively, but we need to find solutions to it that can show outcomes. Now, to give you some background, 5 years out from 2030, every single SDG is off track, right? Not just Pakistan, everywhere. Right? 48 countries spend more on debt repayment than on healthcare. So there's a data point there. Rizvi Saab has been talking about it. And that's like 3.4 billion people in the world. And traditional channels of official development assistance, they're on the decline. Unchecked population growth, climate shocks, poverty, they're converging at a threatening pace. And they threaten the well-being of over 250 million Pakistanis. 107, maybe 110 million of those are children, 68%. Below the age of 18, as per a UNICEF report, I think 2023. Now I'm going to take the opportunity to reframe the narrative from the investment narrative. Investing in children for us it's not charity. It's the smartest thing, most sustainable development investment we can make by putting children at the heart of the capital allocation, because their future is the foundation of ours. We recognize that. Now, how do we try and solve for it? We must hardwire child-focused outcomes into the DNA of how capital is mobilized, structured, and then how we deploy it across the public finance and public budgets. We talk about blended finance, we talk about private capital. Those will come in once we show them the linkage and how we will address it. Over a period of time, we determine a time frame and we say, okay, this is how we'll address it. And you can monitor it. And first of all, I'd like to commend also UNICEF for the concept of the child lens investing. I don't know if you spoke about it today, but that provides a practical framework to align capital with child well-being from destiny to delivery. So please, if you haven't looked at it, do look at it. I read it, and we'll try and build, with your inputs. And SDPI is leading from a thought leadership perspective. So whatever you come back with, we'd like to, stitch it together, test it, and then see how we can implement it at the provincial levels, because that's where the rubber hits the road. Now, what are we doing about it? Pakistan has developed a social impact financing framework where children are front and center. Traditionally, aid has been focused on spending without regard for specific measurable outcomes. So we're shifting our operating model to impact-linked financing. And the Honorable Prime Minister, he set up this committee for social impact financing with subject matter experts from health, to agriculture, to how you look at poverty. It has members from the development sector, senior government officials, so the Federal Secretary for BIS, for poverty alleviation, for climate. Finance is leading this whole discussion. So the finance minister has been heading that. I'm looking after and convening the task force myself. We designed funding mechanisms so we can draw philanthropic capital that Rizvi Saab has been talking about, and private capital in a sustainable and structured manner. A framework didn't exist, right? So if you don't have a framework, when we ask people how we're going to do that, they say, well, money will come in and it's just going to go out through a drain. And I'm being animated because it hurts me, because I'm a Pakistani just like most of us here. And it's sad that we do not see the real impact. One of the reasons is because our denominator of population keeps on growing and we don't address the core issue, right? For reasons that I fail to understand. If someone can explain to me why all of these smart people can't pressurize together to address that, which is an existential threat more than the external securities people talk about. And someone mentioned that earlier. I think Sheikh Saab had mentioned that. So the MF-led task force comprises of these experts. We're launching this on the back of several outcome-based financing initiatives. One has been spoken briefly about by Zafar Masood Saab, I think earlier, on the Pakistan Skills Development Bond, which is linked to specific outcomes. We can do the same with healthcare. We got input from the Aga Khan Hospital gentleman, Dr. Samin Siddiqui. He had a few ideas that can be actioned. So we're working with him as well. And I'd like to take input from the Bari Saab and Rizvi Saab if they have options that we can do some self-funding, and we can also then determine solutions first and try and find funding. Funding comes in. Issue is when you say donor fatigue and all that, that's because they're like tired of giving money. It's not because the world doesn't like us anymore or something. Now this framework integrates child-sensitive priorities across education, health, nutrition, climate resilience, and child protection, and which is very important in our society as well. It's designed to unlock result-based financing, outcome-linked instruments, and climate debt strategies. Create synergies with clear metrics for child impact, like school access, immunization cover, stunting reduction, clean energy for schools and households. All these are important, right? Because they all get linked up to the SDGs eventually, right? So again, these are moving targets when you have, that you need to address. But we tie in every dollar to real measurable outcomes over a predetermined time frame. We are keen to collaborate and establish mother-child health-specific targets to be achieved in the next 5 years and next 10 years that are tied to SDGs, which at a foundation level impact children from pre-infancy. So some aspirational ones that we're toying with, let's say, reduce maternal mortality to below 70 per 100,000. It's around 155 maybe. I think that's a figure about a year ago. Cut under 5 mortality by half. It's a challenge. It's around 53-54% right now. Ideally, eliminate child stunting and wasting through nutrition-linked interventions. And on the other, on this marker alone, let me just give you the fact base. The stunting rate, I think you saw that somewhere as well. That's World Bank data on children under 5 is 38%. It's more than 60% in the poorest rural districts, which is alarming, right? Now, these high rates persist despite 2 decades of poverty reduction initiatives, such as the BISP. And we have a lot of other initiatives going on, and we keep on talking about it at these forums. And I'm being self-critical here because we need to try and find a solution to this. And this is inextricably linked to the combination of poor nutrition, high fertility rates of 3.15% on average, and very low birth spacing, and the prevalence of early pregnancies. People don't like talking about this. This is what we should be talking about, right? We don't like discussing these things because we think these are taboo. These are our problems. We have to start recognizing them, not just be aware of it, recognize that this is our problem. It's not going to go away, right? It's just going to grow. And then our government is determined to try and reverse this trend, but we need your support on this. You know, SDPI can publish a report with all that. How do you action it, right? So this is very important. We look at this data and we say, okay, how do we address it? Because this number is not going down, right? It's not a matter of funding. We keep on talking about instruments, and most people, I'll be very honest, haven't designed these instruments, right? So we can talk about it in a textbook manner, and I'm a practitioner, right? So when I ask these questions of how do we design it, the first thing we're doing is the skills development one. And we took help from British Asian Trust on that. And I'm inviting everyone here to please come up with implementable solutions where we can work together, and we'll work with you on this, right? So then we can take it to the relevant line ministry to implement. The improvement in the health of expectant mothers and their children from improved metrics will lead to more able. This is a long-term thing. So please, the younger people here should think about it. More able-bodied, cognitively enhanced children in the population. And by that time, they'll be entering the workforce of this country. We talk about exporting this workforce. Do you think we can export them? So they will have to be ready to contribute positively to the economic activity of this country. I mean, these are hard statements I'm making because these are the hard truths. And our fiscal space is limited, but honestly, our ambition is not. And this is good to see the inputs earlier from people, because we're trying to address these basic issues. That's why we're blending public and private and philanthropic capital into outcome-based structures like social development impact bonds with verified targets and third-party evaluations. And we then also need to move the national investment pipeline with measurable outcomes that directly benefit the well-being of children. For that, innovative mechanisms like debt for child impact swaps, you may have heard of them. They have been developed in other developing economies and emerging markets. Outcome-based social bonds, blended concessional finance, they can all be scaled. I have a couple of examples I'll share with you that were linked to health. So it gives you some idea, practical idea. Now, so we're asking subject matter experts here and practitioners who can help design pilots. We can pilot it and then we can scale it. And we can pilot it not just with government funding. We can pilot it with private capital as well. There are people who want to invest in these areas. There are people who have philanthropic capital, which is separate from private investment capital, who want a return, right? And they want a return for a reason. And people get this wrong all the time. They want a return because they want to make sure it's really happening. So they may take suboptimal returns, but they will put the money on the table if you can show them the outcome, right? And we have struggled, unfortunately, as a nation in that. So when you do that, then we can talk about, the country partnership framework and the RSF being drawn down on, if we link it to positive outcomes, right? It's there. The finance minister has spoken about it. The Honorable Prime Minister has spoken about it. I can't pull that money, right? Till we have these outcome-linked solutions that people trust us that we will implement, and we will show them what's really happening. For me, every climate shock is a child rights issue. And I think, I don't want to say more than two things. Children are disproportionately impacted or affected by climate-induced displacement, food insecurity, and health risks. Pakistan is pushing for climate-linked investment strategies that build child resilience with the help of UN agencies like the UNICEF, as well as the multilateral development banks through resilience infrastructure. They have the WASH program, clean energy. These are all things that are already in the works. If you want more to happen and more funding to be allocated, we can keep on talking about the budget, and there's work being done on the budget for the next 5 years, 6 years. But you need to empower whoever is in government. And I'm being agnostic because I'm sitting as a functionary within the Ministry of Finance, right? Because this will go beyond me and you. This is for the well-being of our future and our children as well. So we're calling for a partnership to co-create, co-design We invite experts present here to come and work with our teams on the ground in terms of designing and launching and monitoring impact-linked, child-positive projects. We urge UNICEF, and we've spoken to your colleagues in Yahya all the time, investors to work with us in co-developing these solutions. Again, from a CLI, from a CLI lens, and a lot of this can be replicated from other nations. We can localize it because of our peculiar requirements, and then we can push for child-responsive finance targets. Disclosure statements and standards have to be then set and then monitored, and then the CLI alignment can happen through a investment taxonomy as well, which is required. It's not developed. So those are things that we really need to work on together. I'll give the floor back to Dr. Saab. Thank you for taking my thoughts, but I would like to keep this as an ongoing dialogue. We are working for solutions. We're looking for good advice from a structuring perspective, linking it to outcomes. So I'll give you a couple of outcomes here that we're looking at, and they're in the works. Some people can call it sin tax, but what if I tax, let's say fizzy drinks, and put a levy, right? Or tobacco. The industry that's already taxed, that's taxed. But if you do that, that entire pot of money can go into healthcare outcomes linked, right? Similarly, there are a lot of things that can be self-funded. And what it does is it addresses a lot of things. It not just reduces the consumption of items that are potentially not good for health. I know a lot of people may be smoking and having Coca-Cola or whatever, and I shouldn't be taking names like that. The reality is other nations do that. So we need to recognize that there's money that can be allocated, by reallocating, funds into sort of child-friendly initiatives as well. Because whatever you start, and in this country, children are, their level of consumption, especially of certain beverages, is much higher than even the developed nations. So they also do it parenting. There's also doing what's available. Then you come to it's not just about good sort of health and well-being. You also reduce the propensity of consuming this in the future. So please start looking at it from that angle. There are self-funding mechanisms that we're looking at, potentially transitioning the Sehat Sahulat program as well, from 100% non-contributory to being contributory by potentially mandating certain families with a higher income bracket. People don't want to hear about it, but that's what other nations do, right? So you transfer wealth, and you create levies where it impacts the broader base, because we want to impact the larger population. So these are examples that I can go on, but these are things that we're going to work with the line ministries and specialists like you in these sectors. So people with positive mindset, always looking for solutions. Please come. We're available. We always, please reach out to me directly or through SDPI, and we can have sort of a very focused dialogue on what needs to be done, how are we going to do it, and then talk about the funding, right? Funding will come in. That I can assure you. I think FM has been talking about it, the finance minister, for a while, and I just wanted to sort of elucidate on these aspects a bit more. So, Dr. Saab, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Advisor, for a very gracious invite to come to you and work with you. And our UNICEF team and SDPI team will be definitely following you to find the venues of a joint work. You have mentioned some of developing a taxonomy, child lens, impact assessments, and also including kind of a strategy to find more actionable, feasible, innovative financing instruments. So our teams will be reaching you, but we truly understand your very busy schedule. We will be really obliged if you can designate a focal person from your department to coordinate all this efforts. So our team will be reaching to you for this focal person nomination, and will also be coming to your office with the recommendations and a summary of today's session that can set a base for developing a joint agenda where UNICEF and SDPI can help you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And this really brings me towards the end of this discussion, already past 30 minutes than the time, but there are so many questions still left unanswered in the chat box even. But be sure that our team is taking all the chat boxes on the notes and also copying, and all your recommendations that you have provided us on the chat box will be equally on the part of the analysis that UNICEF and SDPI team will be doing to develop a policy agenda or policy brief based on today's conversation. On the thanks, let me extend my first thanks to UNICEF for making this possible, this discussion possible, this focus on public finance from a child lens and going beyond expenditure to taking it as an investment. I think this was much needed. We're really thankful to the country representative, Mr. Joshua, Sadaf, Zulfikar Sahiba, Miran, who has joined, and the entire team UNICEF who has been behind this. So we're really, really thankful. On behalf of UNICEF and SDPI, I am thankful to Honorable Advisor who's joined us, the member social sector, and all the distinguished panelists, those who joined us from Pakistan and out of Pakistan. We really learned a lot from your insightful discussions, and it really refined our agenda that where is we need to work specifically. So I'm sure our team will be reaching to you if there are any further questions for you, and will be sharing the document that we will be developing for your feedback and comments before taking it to the government, the Ministry of Finance, and other stakeholders. I'm also thankful to please join me in thanking the team SDPI, those who have been behind this discussion. And I'm sure this event should have not been possible without a very proactive and active leadership from Dr. Razia Safdar, who is leading the team from SDPI. We have Khadija and other colleagues in her team, those who are making this possible. And finally, please join me in thanking to our MIS team as well, who really made us 2.5 hours discussion without any technical glitches. So we are really thankful. And finally, on behalf of SDPI UNICEF, I also like to thank our Executive Director, Dr. Abid Suleri, who is always available to take these innovative ideas and to take forward. So I would now close here, thanking all of you, and I'm sure we have so much agenda on our plate to work on and reaching to the government. So once again, thank you, each one of you and every one of you and the audience, those who have joined. Really helpful, insightful comments and questions will be guiding to refine the future discussions, the agenda that we will be developing, and the reports and policy briefs. Thank you so much.